And then there's the like I made that little two-hole flute. I don't know if I know Mandy has the recordings from the past ones, so if you didn't see that, I made like a paper flute that was it's just like this one. It just has two holes, but it's made of paper. Doesn't sound as good as like a nice one, but it makes sounds and you can like play it once once the foliage comes back and then you can just go outside and get a leaf, and basically any leaf that is like especially in the spring it's nice to teach kids this and it'll be if you wanted to really learn it too, it'll be, a learning thing for music teachers as well. But you um you take a leaf, a fresh grown leaf is best because they're still like pliable. They're not like hard and like dry and stuff. So this is like from the end of my pothos plant in my bathroom. It's like a probably, I think they call these like devil's leaves too, because they're basically like impossible to kill. Um, so this is probably just like grew a few weeks ago because there's leaves on there that's probably like a year or two old, and this is at the end of the stem. So you instead of it's funny when I watch Hmong music videos sometimes, like we were talking about modern Hmong music as well. Sometimes in modern Hmong music, they have, where it's kind of like in American culture where we might recreate what we think Shakespeare looked like in plays. Hmong music will do that with like recreating like Hmong life 100 years ago. And since people don't play the leaves, that it's not like common knowledge anymore, they'll just put it in their mouth like this and then blow it. But if you like actually play the instrument, you'll know that they're not playing. Like if someone faked playing the piano and you play the piano, it's just like so blatantly obvious to you that they're faking it. Um, or any instrument for that. But to play the leaf, you in Hmong we say "boom blong," not "bu" meaning to fold, and "blong" is a leaf. So it's not blowing the leaf is not the proper term. It's folding the leaf because you have to fold it into your mouth like this, and then you blow out the top, and you're creating a seal with this part of your mouth or the bottom lip, and all the air comes out just from the top of your mouth. And this top, so you fold it like this, and the top part right here, this is what's vibrating, and it becomes the reed, and it vibrates, and that's what makes the sound. And so you can play, I did like Happy Birthday for the kids the other day. And depending on the leaf, every leaf's a little different, so some of them will be more pliable. I also did Hey Jude, which I don't know how many kids know that song anymore, but so you could play, like any song with this, and that's like what Hmong people use to talk in our music. Of course, you could play Western music with it, which sometimes even Hmong people who can play this, they don't think about, or like, I mean, they think about it because they know they can do it. It's actually people who like if they're like, oh, is that like a Hmong specific instrument? Like you can only play Hmong music with that, which usually isn't true. Instruments you can take it and play different styles, obviously. And then I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But um, towards I have like a few slides, if that's okay for me to share. I'll just go through. I like talking to teachers because I was an informal educator at one point. Um, before I started working before I became self-employed, but I was a marine biology educator at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So I was teaching marine biology to kids, to the public, and everything. So I always like talking to teachers. Um, but before I do that, do any of you sail? like on boats, like with a sail, not like motorboat, but like with a proper sail. Yeah, so I'll get to a point with this, but um, so when I was in high school, I was taking the SAT test, and on the SAT test, they had this word, and it was spinnaker. And I had no idea what a spinnaker was because I didn't sail. And it's that colorful sails you see on these boats, the part that's at the front, and it specifically is used when you're going downwind, so it catches the most wind. Hence why it's like big and it's like balloon shaped. But there's no way you would know that word unless you were like upper middle class kid, mostly from the East Coast, and just because these tests were just not culturally relevant to a lot of people. So if you're not from that specific demographic, it's like you're just at a disadvantage. And after college, I worked at this place called the Center for Wooden Boats, CWB, and the joke we had was CWB didn't stand for Center for Wooden Boats; it stood for Center for White Beards, because all it was all the people, all the members, most like 90% of them were like old guys with beards, because that's the people that can own boats because they're rich. And so I worked with these gorgeous boats, but it wasn't always relevant to me because that's not how I like grew up, and it reminded me of this thing from this test on the SAT, the spinnaker, that word. This is me as a fifth grader, not fifth grader, 5 years old, kindergarten. My first school picture. But in school, when I was learning English, and kids learn within like 2 months of being exposed to a language, they're like fluent already. But there were a few problems I had with learning English and a few confusions, but I was put through ESL, and ESL, English as a second language, and there was a lot of problems with that test because, or as of that curriculum, because um, a lot of times it's kind of racist or not culturally relevant. Like I remember this on a test, and they asked me what this picture was, and I never got this picture right. And I remember it for every year, but I never got this what this word was. And during these tests, it was like an interview actually. It was not just a paper test. You had to sit in front of a teacher, and they would basically it was very intimidating. But they would ask you these questions. They show you pictures, and you have to tell them what the picture was. So this was one of the pictures. I think they wanted me to think of this scene from Cinderella, but the problem was that because I didn't grow up, my parents aren't from the US or from the West, so this fairy tale wasn't relevant to me. So I never got that question right, and so it was just not culturally relevant. So it wasn't that I was bad at English, it was just that I was asked all these questions that weren't relevant to me, and that made me feel like really stupid as a kid because it just was designed by someone who didn't evaluate intelligence in a good way. I was also asked this what this was, and I never got this correct ever. The carriage was the correct answer to that last picture, not pumpkin, not magic, but carriage. Um, which it could have been any of those three, but that they think the correct was carriage. This one, I never got this correct. I didn't pass ESL until the seventh grade, actually. But I would argue that most kids through the sixth grade wouldn't know this word, which is sphinx, and that was never in our school curriculum. I only figured this out because when I was in the sixth grade, I asked a classmate, his name was Otto. I asked him what this was, and he told me, and it's because his parents really liked Egypt, so that's why he knew what this was. But otherwise, these tests, they just weren't very relevant to me. And there's like, if I showed you this Hmong picture, you probably wouldn't know what that is because it's very specific to Hmong. Or if I showed you this picture, you might say Bigfoot, which could be right, but there's also Hmong mythology, just like with Cinderella, which is relevant just to Hmong like culture. So there's this mythological cryptid creature called the Malu, which is similar to Bigfoot, but that's what I would say this is. And then there's like this, which is uh, I forget what I googled to get this picture, but it's very similar to the Hmong description of this animal called the rattan ghost in English, which eats the roots of rattan trees or rattan vines. And so if I ask, if I ask these questions to people who aren't Hmong and they don't get it right, it's just because it's not relevant to them. And as a kid, I was always subject to that in school. That was really hard for me. So when I do presentations like this, especially to Hmong relevant audiences or people who work with Hmong students, it's always important for me to remind them that sometimes we don't even think that we're being discriminatory, but we are. Just like with Spinnaker, that question Spinnaker, which all those SAT tests aren't necessarily designed by people who know but all the demographics and are thinking of all the demographics of people, right? I was also asked, there's a lot of words in Hmong that are very specific that English doesn't have. So I talked about how in Hmong music, there's the best word for Hmong music is shua, which is voice, but depending on the context, you could say Hmong has like 15, 20 words for music. And it's the same for like the English word for wear, like wear a shirt, wear pants, wear a hat. We just use wear, wear an earring, wear a necklace. But Hmong has a lot of words depending on how that item is worn. Like this first word, na, on the left it's written in Latin characters, and then on the right it's written in Hmong Pahao characters. Na is like for a shirt or a pants, where it kind of like envelops your body. And then the second word is dong, which is when you're wearing a hat, because how you wear a hat is very different than how you wear a shirt. So Hmong people have different words for that. Zhao for shoes. So how you wear your shoes is different than how you wear your shirt, right? And then jaw is like with earrings and a necklace, because how you wear that is very different than how you wear a shirt. And then she, like wearing a seatbelt, how you wear a seatbelt is completely different than how you wear a shirt, right? So when you think about it from like a Hmong perspective, why does English only have one word when there's completely different ways that you put something on? Wearing a seatbelt, there's not really even wearing, or it's wearing, but in a much different way than you wear a shirt. So when we talk about Hmong music, sometimes I really like to emphasize that some things can't be translated correctly, and that's totally fine. I think sometimes we really try really hard to equate it to something in the West, which is totally normal, and I think we should do to an extent. But sometimes when you can't find that equivalent, it's like totally okay as well. And to just be like, oh, maybe this doesn't exist in English or in Western music, and that's okay. So I talked a lot in my presentation to the students about how Hmong music imitates Hmong language. So Hmong music is always speaking Hmong words into the instrument. So whenever we play music, it's always Hmong words, and you're always able to, if you play that instrument, you'll be able to understand what the musician is saying. They're not lyrics, they're that the music actually imitates the tonality of the Hmong language, and the the punctuation, which parts of the words are loud. And music cannot imitate language perfectly, but to kind of make an equivalent for that, like if I said, when we play a Hmong instrument like this, and I'm like, whatever, if I go, it's always a Hmong word in that, and it's always imitating a certain sentence or a certain word, and that you can't play Hmong music without speaking Hmong. It's like you cannot write English letters without writing a sentence or a story, right? You could just write random letters, but why would you do that, right? That would just be really silly to just write 100 random letters. So Hmong music is the same. Like you could just play tunes that sound Hmong, but why would you do that? Because you're not speaking Hmong. But of course, when I say, like, if I were to say Hmong, if I were to say that, sometimes some parts it imitates it really well, and if you just play like one word like that, it's hard to do it because your brain can't follow along really well unless you're playing a whole sentence or something of the. But to kind of make kind of a equivalent comparison, if I were to write this in English, hello, my name is Neng, and it's nice to meet you. That's how you would write it like properly and correctly, right? Um, that would be like if I spoke Hmong and you could like actually hear every part of the language, right? But if I wrote like this, if I wrote this, hello, Mning, it's nice to meet you, you would still understand it. Even if you didn't see that first part, you would still understand that second part, and that's how it is like for Hmong music. Like even though you can't hear it as well as and as clear as you can hear a spoken word, your brain, automatically fills in the gaps. And so when your brain just kind of fills that in and you understand it, and it's hard to understand when if you don't play Hmong music, but I think when you put it in writing like this, uh, it becomes more graspable. Like this sentence, obviously, it's not grammatically correct or written in a correct way, but you know what it's trying to say. Um, so Hmong music is always words, except the only time is when we do what we call uh lun di. Lun di is kind of like when you play a scale and you play a scale to kind of introduce your music, or when you're speaking, like when I'm speaking to you face to face, for example, like words that I'm saying right now, these words, they actually make a lot of sense, right? But we have little, like in linguistics, we call them discourse markers. Words like or or what, they don't really mean anything, but they mean something, but they're different than words that you have a concrete meaning. You know what I'm trying to say? So Hmong music, it always has words except when we use those little discourse markers, which are kind of similar to playing a scale. And sometimes we do that before we play a song or after we play a song, just to kind of introduce people like, hey, it's almost to say like, this is the key that I'm going to play my words in. So now that you know the key or the style of music I'm going to play in, now you know what to listen for and you know how to translate the music. And that is the only time where we're not saying words that have concrete meaning. And I often get asked, can you, by Hmong folks that are learning Hmong music as well, can you write it in staff notation? Which you can. You can simplify it down and write it in staff notation, and it'll work, and it will work, and people will understand what you're trying to say probably, but they'll get very, very frustrated. So, for example, this would be like a Hmong song that you could write in staff notation, and it would be different for every kind of like music style or any instrument. It might be a little bit different. The scale would change, and how each linguistic tone would change with the notes. But you could do it. And the hard thing is, because it's so but the hard thing is, since Hmong music is so tied to language, you miss out on a lot of stuff. So to write it in staff notation, you would have to put like 1,000 crescendos and decrescendos in there, and there would be a accent mark and a staccato on every single note, depending on what word that note is supposed to represent. So this thing you see on the left here, it's one of the first studies by a linguist on Hmong whistle language. And the top is when you speak this sentence, which is come over here and let's go hunting. Toti no pe mu tuang gai. And then bottom is if you whistle it. Toti no pe mu tuang gai o. Um, so when you measure it, um, the spoken word and the whistled word are uh, exactly alike. And then I recreated this on the left. I actually just did this today. This is on a program called Pratt. And this phrase, is I miss you a lot. And this is not whistled anymore, but this is played on the leaf. So you can really see that it really does mimic um, the music really mimics the language from the how loud each word is. You know, there's certain vowels that are louder than other vowels, and so it's really mimicking the music. It's not just um, random notes, but um,
Wait, just can I jump in with Amy had a
yeah, yeah. That's
question?
the end of my slides. So now it's kind of just whatever. I just go really fast. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're good. Amy, I know she's froggy today. So one of the questions she had when you were talking about like and the discourse markers, we have like vocables in music like the fa la 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 and things that like don't have.
Yeah, they're kind of like that.
Okay. And then I know our last presenters were also talking about like he would play a little bit and the other person would say they're testing out the instrument, but is that they were just getting in the key that they wanted to be in? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it depends what they mean by that, you know, because it might be like the instrument is not theirs and they're literally just testing out
Oh.
how it plays. Or they could be sometimes yeah, if it's not theirs, they might do something like so they're kind of testing out the reed on this because it's a handmade reed. Some of them are cut like a little thick, so it requires more air, that type of stuff. Um, so I'm not sure exactly, but they could have meant a few different things.
And then another question she had, and then she's just going to talk apparently because she's raising her hand, and that's wonderful. Um, so if you does that mean when you're talking about it, everything has a word, does that mean you would not sing like a Hmong melody just on a neutral like loo 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 loo, like a neutral not actual word?
Yeah, so Hmong, that's also very important. That's a good question. Yeah, even when you're teaching Hmong melodies, you always put words to them. They always have words. So when they're teaching Teng, for example, there's all these they're called they're not equivalent to them in English. They're called D, and D is, you know, similar to a scale or something, but it kind of buffers um songs. So you might sing a whole song and you might be like la 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 la. No, I'm gonna go sing this next song, and it's that la 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 part in the middle, but it's always like sung with different Hmong, it's always taught with different Hmong words, and it's expected that you play those Hmong words, even though they're words like la la la, where they don't have meaning. Like they might say tu lu lu tu li dong, and those words they don't mean anything, but the tu you're expected to play that hard like t sound at the beginning, and then when they do like a ooh, you know, there's no consonant at the beginning, so you're expected to play it like a ooh sound.
Hmm.
And how we treat our music, it's also we talk about it like it's a language. So musicians, uh they don't say like, you wouldn't say like he played that poorly or he's just a beginner. What you would say is he played that with bad pronunciation. So we say chua chi meng. So chua is to blow, and then ji is no, and then meng is pronunciation. So literally means blow, no pronunciation. But chua chi meng means like you never say um, you never say they play poorly, or you know, you could say they're a beginner obviously, but you never say play poorly. You would say, you know, like they have, maybe in English we would say like, you know, they have no they have no style, or they're not enunciating enough. They don't have those ornamentation for every notes.
Have at it, Amy.
So in other words, there's no discussion of musicianship. Everything is boils down to text and meaning.
So what do you mean by
So
musicianship?
musicianship, like terms that we would maybe use would be um, you know, um, tone color, or I'm just trying to think of something. I don't know. My questions are coming from my deep desire to try to find a way to to be successful in sharing Hmong music with my students. And my limitation, number one, is language. And I have a great admiration for what you're doing. Learning more about it is almost more intimidating to me, I guess at this point. And so my hope was, okay, well, maybe if there's some tunes, if there's a tune, at least I have the ability to sing a tune and on a neutral syllable like Lou or something like that. But that's not really a legitimate way to share that musical experience, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think the short answer is yes, that's not a legitimate way because then it kind of takes away the meaning. And
Mhm.
for Hmong people, musicianship lies in how the balance between making something sound good and putting words and meaning to it. So since improv is a really big thing, um, some musicians, how you determine what sounds good, and that's it's very, subjective, like it is in any music. Is like, I love that musician, or I love that person's style, or I don't like that person's style. You always hear that from Hmong musicians too, but some people play better than others because they're able to put those small differences in there while speaking words. So the music, for whatever reason, music sounds good or art looks good, is, that musician, they can put meaning into the music, literal meaning, while managing to make that music, just the music aspect of it, also sound and flow really, really good. So I heard a Hmong musician the other day, and he was talking about some people play music that's really good to hear, really good to listen to, that people just really like listening to their music. And then another musician type is people who play it that it touches your heart a lot, and it's just like really melodic. And then a third type of musician is the musician that plays the words really, they pronounce the words in the music really, really clearly. So then you can really hear what they're trying to say. So that's like, just three different categories that they would say Hmong musicians fall into. But yeah, I would say it's not authentic, and you can share a Hmong tune, but if you're singing it like la 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 la, if a musician hears that, they wouldn't consider it Hmong music,
Right. Okay. So,
which does make it, really hard to share Hmong music. And that's, in a way, a downfall of Hmong music is how do you share it? But I think
well,
um
I think I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
yeah.
I'm kind of focused only on the way that I'm trying to share this with the students. And I think we've encountered this. Our discussion in our district has been about like Native American music, how um, specific it is to the people, that it's almost not for us to even try to share by recreating it. We can share Native American music by playing recordings of Native people doing it. And that's kind of how I approach doing that with Native American music, because I feel like anything that I would do would be insulting, could be insulting, or inappropriate. So I want to be I want to be honoring the music of the Hmong culture, and I can't I will not be able to master the language. I know that. So is it best then to kind of have the same approach to play recordings of legitimate Hmong musicians? Is that just a better way to share the music than, our in general music, elementary music, we make music all the time with kids. We try to make music, but maybe this is not a time where we should try to make music. We should be the audience. I guess that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so that's great, and thank you for that. I think so. What Hmong musicians do a lot, because obviously not everybody plays. Everyone who speaks Hmong does not play a Hmong instrument.
Mhm.
So for example, at Hmong funerals, when they play the qeng, which is the instrument that speaks to the dead in a way, it tells the dead like, hey, this is how you get to the afterlife, and it's almost like a belief that music is. I don't want to over romanticize it or like orientalize it, but it's almost like in a way music is able to transcend living realm, but it the musicians, because they know everyone does not play the qeng, and so not everyone will understand it. Or even if two, there's a researcher who researches whistled languages in France. I forget his name right now, but his research shows that when two whistled speakers, when they whistle their language, the understanding is up to 90%. So that's, very, very high for you're just whistling or playing instruments. But even playing players between each other, sometimes they won't understand little parts. So before they play the instrument or after it, they'll say like, "Hey, this is what I'm going to speak," or "This is what I'm saying" in the instrument. So I think if you were to share Hmong music, it's important to get a musician who is able to explain that as well. Like,
Mhm.
okay, now I'm playing and I'm saying, oh, my mom and my dad, I miss you both so, so much. And where's my mom and my dad? Now I'm gonna play it. And then they play it. So it
Mhm.
gives you that connection because, even within the Hmong community, Hmong folks and Hmong musicians do that, and that I think is the most authentic part. And the difference between Hmong music and, I don't really know a lot about Native American music, and depending on the specific Native American language, I'm sure it's very, very different. But the thing with Hmong music, and this is both thing that Hmong people built into their music, is they wanted it to be very authentic as well, so that no one could recreate it, even if they wanted to. So, you can recreate any music, and it would be, appropriating it. But for Hmong musicians were creative enough to be like, we want to create something that people cannot appropriate, period. So even if you tried to appropriate Hmong music, you couldn't, because you would first need to master the language. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about appropriating Hmong music, but I guess you can just, thankfully don't have to worry about that. You just have to worry about, like, who do I get in, which musicians, so they can explain, like, hey, what are they actually saying? And I think that's what's most important. So even if it's like in English, I think one of the first, there's a professor, I think in the one of the UCs, his name is Nick Poss or something like that, but he did this documentary like in the 80s when Hmong people first came to the US, and he took this video of a Hmong guy playing tanjau, which is this instrument, and the Hmong musician explained in English, I'm playing my girlfriend. I miss you so much because I had to come to America. And he played it on the flute, and I found that that was, a very as good as you're gonna get, unless you're doing 100% Hmong, and it does justice to the language. And the key part of it is to explain. For me, the key part of it is to explain that it's not lyrics, but that it is the actual words in the music, because every music has lyrics, but
Right.
or can have lyrics. But Hmong music, the most important and unique thing is that it's actually the Hmong language.
Not trying to monopolize. So I'm just thinking here. So it, if you would have, let's just say even for some sort of performance, formal or informal, you would have a student that does speak Hmong, like tell the audience, whoever the audience would be, that this is how you would say it in Hmong, and this is what it means. Then the group, a group of non-Hmong speaking people really shouldn't even attempt to sing something, right? Or play something.
Yeah, that's so the tricky thing, we talked about this a little bit, I think in one of the previous sessions, but we talked about why Hmong music is like so um it's like solo performance. It's not like, a band or a choir. And
Mhm.
that's because you're really trying to speak Hmong words into the Hmong music. So I think it's because of that, it's hard to have like, it's not like a concert where you can have like 20 students playing, different instruments at the same time. Um, a way to do it, I guess that would be really cool. I mean, even this would be cool for me to see too. But if you had, a Hmong student who speaks Hmong and they could say, hey, this is what we're going to play. And then they would speak the Hmong words. And then someone who's not Hmong, a student who's not Hmong, they could play that tune. You would need like a translator and you would need someone who plays Hmong music to write that tune out. But you know how like I wrote that song in staff notation, so it can obviously be conveyed, and you can definitely learn the tune. Um, and then if me as a Hmong musician, if I heard it, just like let's say I just hear the recording of that non-Hmong person playing a Hmong tune, and it was had been written out for them, I would I would hear it and I would know what they're saying. I would probably, because they don't speak Hmong and they're maybe because they're a beginner, that I would say, oh, they're not playing that with good pronunciation, but I would recognize the Hmong words. I would recognize what they're trying to say. Like when I had that text up, hello, my name is Neng. It would be like that. So I think that's a good way where you could be like someone that you could have like a cross-cultural thing. But I also think it'd be important then for that Hmong student to play the tune as well, because so they're not just acting as like a translator and they're only there to highlight the non-Hmong speaker. But yeah, it is a tricky thing about how to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's really helpful. I'll stop asking questions now.
Jill, bring it on.
Okay. So I guess I'm just wondering if you have any insight into, we teach elementary age kids. And so how how common is it now in like 2022 for elementary school age Hmong students to know, to have knowledge of traditional Hmong music? Is it something that's still like part of home community life, or is it kind of fading away? I mean, how would students, is this part of their daily
Yeah, that's a good
existence?
question. I think so it depends on the community. I know there is a Hmong community in La Crosse. It's not necessarily ginormous compared to say like Fresno, California, or Sacramento, or the Twin Cities. But it exists. I think most Hmong kids, I have a few Hmong cousins who are 8, 9, 10. I think they'll recognize Hmong instruments, and there's it's again just a spectrum, just like with any other kids. Some kids play the piano, some don't, but some Hmong kids, especially with the peng, the funeral instrument and the funeral passage instrument, some kids, they start learning that when they're 5. So they'll be much more knowledgeable than I am by the time they're 8. So there's just really a spectrum. I think it's definitely less common nowadays than it was, say, 50 years ago in Laos, especially because for the flutes, for example, they're really used in courtship, and you would play them for a girl. There's instruments like, like the guitar, I guess, is kind of the equivalent. Guys with the guitar are always sexier, but same with the flute for Hmong dating in life. So because nowadays, we have dating apps or the bar, and so I think like teenagers they know it and they might like to listen to it, but they wouldn't play it anymore because there's like no it's not the same purpose as it was 50 years ago.
Um, I'm sorry to jump in, and I'm by no means the expert. I just wanted to share with you guys, since I did finish this unit already, I was blown away. Like, none of my students, like, it was new information for them that the words and the music is the same thing. Um, but there were some kids that, as I started talking about that more and more and showing more videos, they're like, I think I'm starting to catch some of this. Like, they were actually inspired by that. So, I mean, I think to even teach them that concept was really powerful for them. It was
Yeah,
cool.
that's true. I think even me, I was born in Thailand, came here when I was 2, but I think I didn't I learned that when I was around 8, 7, and I think that's typically the age when kids even learned that fact, 50 years ago. So it's not like they knew that since they were 2 because no one's playing an instrument when they're 2. But I think even 50 years, 100, 200 years ago, most kids learn that Hmong music is words when they're around 8, 9, 10 years old. And only then do they start practicing it. So I think it's normal to learn that when you're 8, 9, 10, because that's when, for example, my grandparents, 60 years ago, when they were 9 or whatever, if you lived in Laos, once you're 9, you can start doing chores, similar in any culture. But you start doing chores, and usually one of the chores you do is to watch the cow or watch the buffaloes so that they don't eat the vegetable garden or they don't eat the rice. And what kids start doing when they're that, because they have to do that 12 hours a day and they're bored out of their mind, is they pick leaves and they start playing with the leaf and start playing music with the leaf. So it's not really till they're around 9 years old that they even learn that fact, whether it's today or 50 years ago. So yeah, I didn't really even think about that until you brought that up. But I think because kids don't know about it, maybe when they're around 10, maybe it's even later now that we live in America. I think by the time you get to college age, I would say most Hmong kids know that it's spoken words, even if they don't play an instrument. Um,
So, so in like in a traditional Hmong community, maybe in Laos or maybe in the US, would there be like specific intentional music instruction versus just kind of learning it through by rote and
yeah, so it depends on the instrument. So for the Qeng, like for the instrument that's most often played at funerals, that's very formal instruction. You have to go to a teacher and you learn from the teacher. Um, and that's very formal. I have one right here. But so this instrument, you would learn this from a teacher, and that it's like very formal instruction, and you would go hour a day or whatever you have time for. And this is the most formal instrument, formal curriculum. So you go through all the ritual songs, and then you will also learn songs just for fun. Um, so yes, and then there's instrument like the leaf where because it's a lot of it is just kids bored in the buffalo field. It's not formal at all. You might hear a tune here and there, and then you borrow it from another musician or something. But yeah, there is a here in the U.S. and it's always been formal, the qeng, and it continues to be. The qeng is probably the most played instrument because of how special it is, and uh, a lot of times in the US really really like formal time, so that's one of the strengths of Qing, I guess.
So speaking of formal time, can you talk about meter and like steady beat? And because I didn't feel like I was hearing it when we had our demonstrators, but you said sometimes it is there, and
Yeah, I think you could write it there like how I wrote those songs in staff notation. I don't It's definitely not formal. And think depending on the style of music you could put different timings to it. because we don't really have like time to how we talk. But if you wanted to take how someone talks, like a sentence or a paragraph, a speech from Joe Biden or whatever, and you wanted to sparse it out into 4/4 time, there's probably a way to do that, but it would just be kind of weird. But there's definitely a way to do it, and I'm sure like you could do it. Um, but for Hmong music, yeah, you could definitely do it as well, but it's almost like, what's the point, because you're just talking and it's kind of like freestyling.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's a good question. I think it brings, so sometimes people ask about different like styles of music, different styles of Hmong music. So there are, obviously I haven't heard every genre of English music and I haven't heard every genre of Hmong music, but so when I hear a different genre of Hmong music or a different style of playing the flute, I won't really know everything they're playing. I might catch phrases here and there, but I will recognize it as Hmong music. Kind of like if you speak to an English speaker from, let's say, like Nambia, and they've learned English in Nambia, or whatever country that you've never been to or heard of, you will know that they're speaking English, but maybe you don't catch everything. It's kind of like different accents versus different genres of music. So for Hmong, it really goes back to that, like that language piece. And I think for I think Amy is your name. You were asking about yeah, about that the authenticity of Hmong music, and it, I talked a little bit about this with the Hmong Kids session, but um, a lot of Hmong music, people think it's just music because it's like one of a kind. I think there's one language, one Native American language where they play music on the leaf. I think it's in Arizona. I forget which language it is. They play music on the leaf, but it doubles as a language as well. And there's about 60 some languages in the world that can whistle their language, but no one plays it on music to the extent that Hmong does. So it's so rare. It's like a one of a kind music thing. And Hmong people, as I said before, really built that to be like not able to be recreated or appropriated. And I told this to the Hmong kids because I learned it when I was about their age. But in Hmong history, when the Hmong were living in what we call China now, but around that Yellow River Valley area, that's where the Hmong ancestral lands are. There was a time when the Han Chinese tried really, really hard to exterminate the Hmong, genocide. And if you spoke Hmong, they would cut your tongue off. That's the So you could only speak Mandarin, and if you spoke Hmong, they would cut your tongue off. And one of the things Hmong people did was to put our language in our music, so that when Han people heard us playing music, they would just think it's music, which allowed us to speak um, our language without them knowing, even like in front of them. So it's kind of like a resilience tool, a big also like a fu, like we don't care type of thing. So music served as that like stronghold of our language, and I think that's really powerful for kids to hear, for Hmong people to hear, because it's a really creative thing that Hmong musicians did, and it also serves the purpose of showing how the arts are important beyond just, oh, this is nice to listen to, because sometimes we kind of devalue the arts, but at the end of the day, the arts are what make us human. So there's that piece of Hmong history where Hmong people said, we're going to make something to save our language, and it's going to be our music. And um, no one was able to do it, and even the people who are here to kill us and exterminate us, we could speak our language right in front of them and they'll be none the wiser. So I think that's what makes Hmong music so authentic, is the fact that that piece of history where Hmong people said, okay, you're going to cut our tongues off, well, we're still going to speak our language in front of you. You won't even know, because we're going to hide it in our music.
That's awesome. Do you, can you just talk a little bit, and I don't know if this will help Amy at all with just trying to get her head wrapped around something that she could do with kiddos, but, um, I mean, there is Hmong popular music as well, right? Like,
Yeah, there's Hmong popular music. If you the easiest thing I would say for Hmong traditional music to teach any group of people is the common motifs that you'll hear in Hmong music. A phrase that you hear a lot is "lau or lau" or "mong or mong," and um, "lau or lau" is like you all, and "mong" is of course Hmong people like "mong or mong" or "lau or lau." They're actually the same tones for each word, so they're played in basically the same way. But there's phrases like that. So to the phrases we play when we start our music, which is "ndue ndue," and those are there's motifs. Those are two motifs. There's the motif of "我靠那些" and "我靠那些." "Koshia" is a word that doesn't exist in English, but "koshia" means to um fix your heart or fix your emotions. In English, we use heart to be the center of emotions. For Hmong people, we actually use the liver. So Shia is liver. So you don't love people with your heart, you love them with your liver. But Wakane Shia, there's because music is always supposed to heal. So there's always there's those motifs that basically every song has, and it's part of what helps people understand a song too. But if you ever like lose count of the music and you're like, oh, okay, like that'll put you right back on track, and you're like, okay, now he's saying that, now I can start over and start like listening to the music again and what they're trying to say in the music. But there's motifs like that, and to get those motifs, you would talk to a lot of musicians and be like, hey, what are the phrases you use? And then there would be snippets of 3 words and 4 words and 5 words or whatever, and you could those are things that you could then teach to kids and they could play it. Then the tricky part is how do you put it together, but I think for those are like parts where you can always play it, and kids can play it as well, and they can learn the words that go along with it, and it's not as hard as learning a whole language, but they learn the um, a few different words from Hmong.
I know we're getting close on time here. I do have one more question, and you
Yeah.
don't have to like give me a long, super complicated question on this, but I know a lot of our students take Hmong dance lessons. Um, do the movements have like meaning like the words would, or
No, the no the movements don't. I think most of those movements actually they're borrowed from Lao dances, at least the one nowadays, Lao and Thai dances. Um, so they're not like originally Hmong, but we borrow cultures all the time. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, most of them are Lao or Thai, very heavily influenced.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask quick, or want to make sure we're honoring everybody's time? Well, thanks so much. This was really helpful. Um, it's always terrifying to me every time I start anything to learn new when I'm starting from zero, especially in another language. So this has really been helpful to start to continue getting my head wrapped around this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard. Music is hard to master. We spend our whole lives at it, and then when you got to learn a language too. But I applaud all of you guys. So that's really really nice that I get to teach it to different people as well.
Awesome. We will be having one more session with Neng not the music teachers, but if anybody else is interested, on April 26th at 6:30, he's going to do a session for the community as well. So if anybody's interested. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming, and I will see you all at our next meeting. Neng, I'll see you at our next other meeting. All right.
Awesome. All
Thank you.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.